The fate of U.S. Steel, a new high-profile assignment for Pennsylvania's lieutenant governor, and the state of play in the Pennsylvania legislature. All that and more coming up after this.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host.
Well, hello, I'm Tom Lehman, Harrisburg reporter for WGAL, filling in as your host for Pennsylvania Newsmakers this week. We have a lot of stories to cover, and joining me today just to do that are two reporter friends of mine, Justin Sweitzer with City and State PA, as well as John Cole with the Pennsylvania Capital Star. And gentlemen, one of the bigger stories that's emerged right after the Thanksgiving holiday is the fate of U.S. Steel over the Pittsburgh area, southwestern Pennsylvania, and especially after some recent comments by the president-elect. John, what did he say, and what does it mean for the future of that industry?
Absolutely. So first off, thanks for having us on the program, Tom. The topic of U.S. Steel was something that was in the news throughout the campaign cycle. So still current President Joe Biden and then former President Donald Trump, now President-elect Donald Trump, both are opposed to the proposed sale of U.S. Steel to Nippon Steel, a Japanese company. And they talked about it on national security grounds for the reason they oppose this proposed sale. One thing has been certain throughout the campaign cycle and now this past week, President-elect Trump reiterated his opposition to the sale, saying, quote, that it is totally against it. He made it a point to say that he would make sure that they could protect those jobs via tariffs, things of that nature. Now, apparently, some Pittsburgh area reporting that I think is worth noting, that since this deal is still potentially in the works, is that there were some union leaders out in that neck of the woods. This is reporting from the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review out in western PA. This was a quote specifically from the United Steel Workers vice president saying he's very frustrated with the news that came out about it, calling it, quote, a gut punch, because they believe that they can protect those jobs out there as well. And then beyond Trump's comments about it, the reason why it stayed in the news is because Governor Josh Shapiro was asked about it at an unrelated press conference in western Pennsylvania. And when Governor Shapiro was asked about it, he didn't take a position saying he was for or against the proposed sale. He just made it clear that his position is that he wants to make sure those jobs stay in western PA, and that's kind of where we're at right now.
Gotcha. Well, just, I mean, obviously the steel industry huge for that area, so it's no surprise that we're seeing a little bit of skepticism or perhaps even just a little bit more focus on this particular issue right now.
Yeah, as John mentioned, there's a national security component to it. There's a huge job component to it. Like you said, these steel communities, they're very reliant on these jobs. And the steel workers are, really concerned about the potential implications of this sale. I know the president of United Steelworkers is particularly worried about a potential $1 billion investment from Nippon Steel, the Japanese manufacturer that would be acquiring U.S. Steel. They're not exactly certain that, this $1 billion investment into the Mon Valley Works facility will come to be in the way it's being presented. So there's obviously a lot of concern, and I think the jobs are the number one thing here. If for whatever reason this sale would go through and they would eventually choose to, relocate U.S. Steel facilities, that could be a major concern.
And John, there's been a lot of, anticipation of what the reaction has been from both lawmakers as well as state leaders. As you mentioned, I think we're waiting to hear from the governor, but there's certainly been no shortage of reaction to this.
Oh, certainly not. Again, after President-elect Trump made those comments on Truth Social, again, Governor Shapiro asked about it, and then we also saw comments from State Senator President Pro Tem Kim Ward also saying that she wants to make sure the jobs stay in that area too. So again, I think the jobs are certainly the main focus. The question is moving forward, if this deal goes through or not, will those jobs stay put? Another thing I think that's worth noting, though, this is an issue that's purely not along partisan lines, where Senator-elect Dave McCormick will be taking the oath of office in, I think, just a few weeks. And him and Bob Casey, one thing they actually agreed on, they both opposed the proposed sale of U.S. Steel to Nippon. So it's kind of interesting that, again, this is not purely a political discussion, but I think one thing at the heart of it is they want to make sure those jobs stay put for those steel workers in western Pennsylvania.
Gotcha. Certainly a lot to unpack, and as we get past the new year, I'm sure we'll see a lot more interest in that particular topic and what exactly is going to happen happen next. Well, coming up in our next segment, we'll be talking about Lieutenant Governor Austin Davis and a big new role he's going to have that's certainly going to raise his profile, coming up next on Pennsylvania Newsmakers.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. I'm your guest host, Tom Lehman. We're talking about some of the biggest stories in Pennsylvania that have happened in recent days. And joining me to do just that, Justin Sweitzer with City and State PA and John Cole with the Pennsylvania Capital Star. Justin, I wanted to ask you about a big new high-profile assignment for Pennsylvania. Lieutenant Governor Austin Davis, he's going to be chairing the Democratic Lieutenant Governors Association. What does that mean for his, messaging and what he's going to be able to bring to a national stage?
Yeah, so this is a group, again, of national, lieutenant governors from across the nation, and, it gives them an opportunity to network, to talk about what they're doing. And for Davis, this is an opportunity for him to, expand his platform, talk about the work he's doing in PA, but also, give his political profile a little bit of a boost. We've seen his political star rise over the years. Started off as a state representative from the western part of the state, and ultimately was a history-making lieutenant governor for Pennsylvania. And we, heard some rumblings as Governor Josh Shapiro was discussed as a potential running mate. Could Davis become governor one day? And I think that's an idea that has started to pop up in, the minds of Pennsylvania politicos and politics watchers. And, this is a pretty big move for Davis. It gives him a national profile. It gives him, something else to do because, the lieutenant governor role, people bring different motives and goals to that position, and this, I think at its core, really, just gives him a little bit of a boost and gives him a platform to share some of the work he's doing.
Sure.
And Davis is entering this at an interesting time for Democrats. Let's not forget what just happened a month ago. Nationwide, beyond Pennsylvania, we saw Republicans make pretty big gains, and even though, of course, Governor Shapiro and Lieutenant Governor Davis will not be on the ballot again until, we still have a few more years for that. Having said that, though, there are still gubernatorial races and lieutenant governor races across the nation. Virginia comes to mind specifically, because I think Virginia, if I'm not mistaken, is one of the rare states that the governor, lieutenant governor don't run as a ticket. So those are things to keep an eye on, because this will be, again, Democrats, I think, now they're doing a lot of self-reflecting to see what went wrong in this past election. This gives a chance for Austin Davis. What kind of messaging is Lieutenant Governor Davis going to share to these group of lieutenant governors? Right now, there are 19 Democratic lieutenant governors across the nation. And let's not forget, Lieutenant Governor Davis is the youngest one of those. So it's really fascinating that, again, he has this significant role in an important time for Democrats.
Yeah, certainly a generational change, if you will. Justin, Davis has already done a lot of work, though, with this group, and it's been on issues like gun violence.
Right, and I think it's pretty telling. He was elected vice chair last December. That was obviously a big step for him, something him and his office were very proud of. And to see him rise now to chair, I think, shows that the group has a lot of faith in him and his approach to politics and aiding lieutenant governors' offices in general. So I'm really intrigued to see, how he uses this role, both, to potentially elect more Democratic lieutenant governors and also, perhaps shape policy in these offices across the country, because as John and you and I discussed, gun violence is a big issue that he's latched onto and really looked to make progress on throughout his tenure so far, and we might see him reach his hands into different policy ideas and debates. So I think it'll be curious to see how this shapes the rest of his tenure as well.
And John, briefly, I mean, Davis has had sort of a lot of respect within the State House, among lawmakers of both sides of the aisle, so there's certainly that bipartisan angle here too.
I think that's a very good point, Tom, to bring that up, that there are those on the Republican side that certainly have their policy disagreements with Lieutenant Governor Davis. You don't hear them speak ill of him. And I think this is going to be interesting. Again, it's a real big opportunity for the Lieutenant Governor to expand his nationwide image. And should he be successful in that role, should Democrats flip some seats in the process? We know that Governor Josh Shapiro has been known on the national stage now for several months, if not beyond that, due to his name again being brought up for potentially being the vice president candidate months ago. Now Lieutenant Governor Davis has a chance to make a name for himself, particularly in these Democratic circles, travel the nation, and again, we shall see what will come of that.
Gotcha. Well, in the meantime, Lieutenant Governor Davis will be at the State House, of course, being the Lieutenant Governor and the President of the State Senate. We're going to talk a little bit more about the legislature coming up in our next segment, the state of play, and what issues we might see get worked on in the coming months. We'll be right back.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. I'm your guest host this week, Tom Lehman, and we're talking about the state of play in the Pennsylvania legislature, the balance of power, essentially staying the same, but there's certainly going to be some differences in this upcoming legislative session. Joining me once again are our guests here, Justin Sweitzer with City and State PA, as well as John Cole with the Pennsylvania Capital Star. And John, let's start off with just the basics here. This is still a divided legislature. In fact, I don't think from a net standpoint we lost or gained any seats if you're either party here. But the bottom line is we're heading into a new session, and that balance of power is still very much a big dynamic.
That's correct, Tom. If you would have told political pundits months ago that there would be the Republicans would win the presidency in Pennsylvania and the 3 row offices, many would have assumed that the Democrats' 1-seat majority in the state house would not be safe. But think again, that's Pennsylvania politics, where the Democrats again maintain that 1-seat majority and the Republicans maintain a multiple-seat majority in the state Senate. So once again, the only, as Governor Shapiro likes mentioning quite often, the only governor in the nation with a divided legislature.
Not for too much longer.
Yes, but it will be fascinating to see again what happens this upcoming session, what priorities they're able to get done, because there's a lot of times where one bill can get out of one chamber and not the other. And again, we'll see what happens in that regard.
So, Justin, one really interesting thing about this is if you look at the results from the election, and they've been certified at this point, but you look up at the top of the ticket and you look at how Republicans did for the presidential race, for the U.S. Senate race, obviously Bob Casey getting knocked off by Dave McCormick, and a lot of other races, including the row offices, all Republican wins. But when you look at the legislative side of things, there was a little bit of, some changeover in the Senate, but sure. For the most part, you really didn't see much change, and Democrats were able to hold on to, that very slim majority in the House in a year when Republicans really did very well.
No, it really is incredible, as you mentioned. It's the presidency, it's a U.S. Senate seat, it's the row offices that were up for grabs. Republicans even flipped to congressional seats. Susan Wild and Matt Cartwright, both Democrats who lost to Republican challengers this cycle. Interestingly, I spoke to outgoing GOP leader Brian Cutler, who is no longer serving in the in GOP leadership in this coming session, and he attributed it to 2 things. He said that Republicans seem to be outspent by some dark money groups who were pouring money into these races, and he also really really pointed to the state legislative maps that were drawn in recent years. He described the State House map in particular as incumbent-friendly, and said they were really drawn in a way that benefited incumbents. So Republicans, ultimately didn't pick up, any additional seats from what they have now, allowing Democrats to retain their very slim one-seat majority. So it's going to be really interesting, and I think Republicans were really banking on even just picking up one seat to flip that majority, and now we have a new GOP leader in the House, Jesse Topper. So I'm very curious to see how that will impact, policy negotiations as we move forward, with some new blood and leadership, and what issues he may try and prioritize. Obviously, Democrats still have the majority and control the calendar and what gets voted on. But because of the divided nature, it's just going to require some give and take, so it'll be fascinating.
Sure. One storyline I think is going to be interesting to follow in the state Senate in particular is that, again, there are two, even though there was, so again, the net seats, again, it's the same in the state Senate. However, there is a Republican that flipped a seat in Philadelphia. That's the first time a Republican is going to be serving in the state Senate from Philadelphia in like 2 decades. That's Joe Picozzi, who won the 5th district. He beat incumbent Democrat State Senator Jimmy Dillon. I'm curious to see, him being a Republican from Philadelphia, are there going to be specific issues that he's going to see eye to eye with his Democratic colleagues in the Philadelphia delegation or not? And I guess, will he be able to talk to his Republican colleagues about those particular issues? One that comes to mind, and maybe we'll talk later in the program about SEPTA funding, because I know that's something that's top of mind for those in the Philadelphia area.
Yeah, it's certainly an issue that Governor Shapiro didn't really wait to act on. He flexed about $153 million, I believe, in funding to help try and stave off some of the major financial problems that have been looming for SEPTA, trying to prevent some really serious fare hikes and other cuts that might have to happen beyond what was already going to be in play. Well, listen, obviously there are a lot of issues that are going to be coming up in the upcoming General Assembly session, and lawmakers have already sort of given us a little bit of an idea of what issues we might be seeing in legislative form. We'll talk more about that coming up next.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania American Water. We keep life flowing across the Keystone State.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. I'm your guest host this week, Tom Lehman. Well, listen, around this time of year, the holidays, people are often putting together their wish lists. And you know what? On December 1st, we got into the new Pennsylvania legislative session, and lawmakers are already giving us an idea of what's on their wish list as we head into the 2025 season. Joining me again are Justin Sweitzer with City and State PA, John Cole with the Pennsylvania Capital Star. Justin, we've seen some of the early inclinations from lawmakers, the memos that they send out saying what bills they want to introduce and giving us an idea of what issues they want to tackle, among them recreational cannabis legalization. Adult use, as it's often called. What are the chances that this happens in 2025?
Yeah, that's a very good question. One that I don't know that I have the answer to at this time. But this is something that's been tossed around in the state legislature for multiple sessions now. With some Democrats and some Republicans supporting it at different times. There have been proposals to have it sold in state stores. There have been state liquor stores, I should clarify, and proposals to sell it in more of a market-based system with dispensaries and the like. And Pennsylvania already does have a medical program, an operating medical program, where it's sold through dispensaries. And I think to try and answer your question, the interesting component to the marijuana legalization debate is that the state is facing a general fund operating deficit, which essentially means the state is spending more than it's anticipated to spend more than it's bringing in revenue. The State Independent Fiscal Office pegs that number in 2024-2025 at $3.4 billion. That's expected to expand to around $6.6 billion by 2030. So the state is going to need to find a way to plug some revenue holes, and whether it's something like legalizing more gaming machines, or whether it's taxing and regulating recreational marijuana sales. Those are two things in the discussion, and I think Pennsylvania, an argument you'll hear is that it's lagging behind its neighbors when it comes to recreational cannabis. New Jersey, New York, Ohio, I think every state bordering Pennsylvania except for West Virginia is pulling in tax money from adult use recreational cannabis sales. So I'm curious to see how this deficit will whether it will prompt lawmakers to act on this sooner rather than later.
John, there's a lot of politics here. I mean, this is one of those issues where it's like there's tons of different proposals that come out and ideas that are thrown about every year. Is that going to be one of the big issues, trying to get down to a product that can get past the legislature and to the governor?
That's exactly the case, Tom, where each session in the past few years, we've seen multiple bills that are brought up. So again, one of the bills that was brought up in the co-sponsorship memo this past week was State Representative Dan Frankel out in Western PA, and then State Representative Rick Krajewski out in Philadelphia. And they have a particular bill that they're proposing for cannabis legalization. Theirs would actually include having it sold in state-owned stores like liquor stores, and having an avenue as well for private businesses as well. But then we've also seen, let's not forget, there have been some Republicans in the past that have been open to the idea of marijuana legalization. You have those like State Senator Dan Laughlin in the past, a Republican in Erie. And then let's keep this in mind. So for this past week, a part of these co-sponsorship memos, there was a bill that should be brought up at some point from State Senator Shreve Street, a Democrat from Philadelphia, and also State Senator Cameron Bartolotta, a Republican out in Western Pennsylvania, a decriminalization bill of marijuana. So that's another bill that I would keep an eye on, that I think they're going to need to get, if this is going to get across the finish line, again, due to the legislature being divided, they have to come to some sort of agreement that gets both sides of the aisle on. And another thing I think that's worth noting in this conversation, in the previous session, State Senator Mike Regan was one of the Republicans who actually had a bill of his own that was a cannabis legalization bill. He's no longer in the legislature. So one of the Republicans that was for it in the state Senate is no longer there. Now we shall see, is there going to be, the conversation going to be different now due to the looming budget issues? We shall see, but that's going to be a really interesting conversation. And that give and take, I'm sure those discussions are beginning as we speak.
Sure, so certainly a lot to look forward to. A divided legislature, I mean, once again, certainly one of those things where it makes it a little more complicated, especially as you look at some of the other issues, some of the other bills, a bill dealing with transgender sports, open primaries, some of the other issues that are coming up in this upcoming session. And swearing-in day, I believe, is January 7th, I believe. So yeah. Certainly, once lawmakers get back to work, there's going to be quite a bit to see in terms of the legislative process. And I'm sure Governor Josh Shapiro quite happy that he has one chamber that is Democrats as well. So obviously, thanks again for being here with us here on Pennsylvania Newsmakers. I'm your guest host, Tom Lehman. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your week.